You know that feeling, right? That quiet sense deep down of who you really are, all the messy bits, the history, hopes, fears.
Hmm.
And then you step out into the world, and bam. Feels like someone takes one look, your clothes, your skin, how you talk, and they've decided. Slotted you right into a box.
Yeah, it's this huge tension, isn't it, between that complex inner self and, well, how others perceive you based on these quick
It
cues.
really is. And that's what we're diving deep into today, this idea of identity alignment,
Hmm.
or maybe misalignment, that gap.
Exactly. The space between our internal identity, shaped by self-awareness, experience, all that, and the world's external categorization of us.
Yeah.
How we see ourselves versus how others just slot us in.
We've pulled together a whole stack of sources for this, notes, research looking at it through psychology, sociology, philosophy, even personal stories.
Yeah, quite a mix.
And our goal here really is to unpack the layers. Why does this friction happen? And maybe find some insights that can help you navigate it in your own life
Yeah.
without getting totally overwhelmed.
So let's start with that core tension, that fundamental dissonance.
Internal versus external. My lived reality versus their snap judgment.
Right. And the feeling that comes with it. Okay, I know who I am inside, but the world seems to see someone totally different. Which version gets to be real?
It's like looking in a mirror, but sometimes it feels distorted. Like a funhouse mirror reflecting back something that isn't quite you.
And this isn't, just a modern feeling. Psychologically, you can connect it back to ideas like Cooley's looking glass self.
Oh, right. Tell me more about that.
Well, Cooley suggested our sense of self isn't just built from the inside out. It's also shaped by how we think others see us. We sort of imagine their judgment.
Huh. So we're constantly reading the room, reading people's reactions, and adjusting our self-concept based on that.
In a way, yeah, it's like a feedback loop. If you perceive that others see you positively for acting a certain way, you might lean into that. You might start performing a version of yourself that aligns with those external expectations, especially if it leads to, say, social acceptance or professional success.
Okay, let's unpack that. Performance. Because the sources really get into this. There's often a kind of
Yeah.
practical need to perform, right?
Yeah.
Especially at work, maybe.
Absolutely. You put on what some call social armor. Could be
Yeah.
the dress code, using the right jargon, maybe just mastering that strategic smile.
So it's about presenting a version of yourself that fits the context, that's seen as appropriate or effective.
Exactly. And identity then becomes less something you just express and more something you actively perform.
Which reminds me of Goffman,
Right.
Irving Goffman.
Yes, his dramaturgical theory. He saw social interaction like a play. We have our front stage, the role we play for the audience,
And the backstage.
and the backstage self, who we are when we're off stage, when no one's watching. Managing those impressions is like a fundamental part of navigating the social world.
But here's the crux, isn't it? That tension within the performance itself. Is it
Right.
just smart adaptation? Figuring out how to get by.
Was it kind of self-betrayal? Are you losing something essential?
That's the big question the sources wrestle with. Some people perform to fit in, right? For acceptance.
Mm-hmm. Others might perform more subversively, maybe to challenge expectations from within. But either way, there's often this little compromise, maybe a big one, on pure, unfiltered authenticity, all in the name of dealing with how others see you.
Okay, so we've got the inner self, the outer perception, the performance bridging them. But why is that outer perception often so quick, so reliant on potentially wrong judgments?
No.
Why do our brains seem wired for stereotyping?
Well, fundamentally, our brains are pattern matching machines. It's evolutionary. Categorization was a survival skill.
Friend or foe, safe or dangerous, quick decisions.
Exactly. You didn't have time for a deep dive back then.
Makes sense. But now in our complex world,
That same mechanism helps us manage information overload. We're constantly bombarded, so categorization becomes a shortcut. This ties right into Daniel Kahneman's work, System 1 and System 2 thinking.
right? System 1 is the fast, intuitive, automatic.
Yeah, gut reaction. And often riddled with biases. System 2 is the slow, deliberate, analytical thinking. But that takes effort. It takes time.
Which are resources we don't always have, especially now. The whole attention economy thing.
Precisely. So we default to System 1. We slap on labels: liberal, conservative, techie, artist, introvert, extrovert. We use these proxies to quickly make sense of people, just to make interaction feel less overwhelming. Even if we consciously try not to, those cognitive grooves are deep.
And the sources point out how globalization and digital life kind of amplify this whole thing. One source had this great metaphor, the onion problem.
Oh, I loved that one. The idea being, like, in smaller, older communities, you saw people in multiple contexts. You saw all the layers of the onion.
The full complexity.
Yeah. But now, online especially, we encounter millions of people, but often just the outer layer, the profile pic, the bio, the curated feed.
Just the skin of the onion.
Exactly. That rich, layered person gets flattened into labels, aesthetics, sound bites. And that makes that feeling of misalignment, the world only seeing a tiny slice of you, feel so common and, frankly, often pretty painful.
It really does. It makes you wonder, in a world seemingly built for these quick reads, these interfaces, how do you even hold on to the wholeness of yourself?
Yeah, how do we navigate all that complexity? Because identity isn't just one simple thing, it's layered. And the sources bring in some really crucial ideas here, like intersectionality.
Kimberly Crenshaw's work. So important.
Absolutely vital. It reminds us that you're not just your race or just your gender or just your class or sexuality or ability. All these things intersect. They weave together in really complex ways.
Which makes the external perception game even trickier, right? The potential for misreading someone is huge, especially if they hold multiple identities that face marginalization, like the example used a Black queer woman in STEM.
Exactly. The assumptions she might face are unique. They wouldn't capture her experience if you just looked at Black or woman or queer or scientist in isolation. Her surface identity, even if she embraces all those parts, just can't convey the lived reality shaped by those intersections.
And this is where things like code switching come in, right? Adapting how you speak or behave, depending on who you're with.
Definitely. It often becomes less a choice and more, well, a necessary survival tool in certain spaces, professional or social. You navigate those potential misreads by adjusting the performance.
Okay, but here's where it gets really, really sticky. What happens when those external labels, the judgments the world throws at you, start to seep inside? The sources talk about this as introjection, or even self-alienation.
Ugh, yeah. That awful feeling. You hear something about yourself often enough, or you're treated a certain way consistently, and you start to wonder, maybe I am just anxious, or maybe I am not leadership material, even if deep down it feels wrong.
Or you actively suppress parts of yourself just to fit in, to align with what others seem to expect.
And that creates this chronic internal tension, anxiety, that classic imposter syndrome feeling.
It sounds like that gap Carl Jung talked about, between the persona, the mask we wear for the world, and the true self. If that gap gets too wide.
The strain is immense, absolutely. Yeah. And culture adds another layer. Think about archetypes, the rebel, the nurturing mother, the stoic father, the creative genius. Society offers these templates.
Roles we can step into or get pushed into.
Right. They can provide a sense of belonging, maybe understanding, but they can also really limit the expression of your unique, messy self. It becomes this constant negotiation. Are they seeing me or are they just seeing a type?
And that negotiation gets even more complex with globalization, right?
Yeah.
Hybrid identities.
Oh, absolutely. Someone growing up between cultures may be feeling too American for their immigrant family, but too foreign for their peers. Or someone bilingual, switching not just words, but maybe whole ways of thinking and feeling. Alignment isn't about fitting one box. It's about navigating skillfully between worlds.
What about identities that aren't immediately visible? Things like neurodivergence or chronic illness or mental health struggles.
That brings a different kind of challenge. If others can't see it, they tend to project assumptions onto your behavior. Oh, they're just lazy or they're being difficult.
And the dilemma becomes, do I constantly have to explain myself? Do I have to prove my reality? Is that even fair?
Exactly. The sources mention functional misalignment. Someone might look fine on the outside, performing competence, but internally they're struggling massively because the environment just isn't set up for how their brain or body works. Or the reverse, someone might look different, but be incredibly capable if given the right context or tools.
And then there's tech, our online identities. So many different versions of us floating around. LinkedIn self, Instagram self, the private group chat self.
So true. And the platforms themselves. They often reward consistency, simplification. They build algorithmic profiles of us based on clicks and posts.
Shaping how others see us, even before they meet us.
Yeah, it kind of pre-categorizes you. Your online presence gets parsed, packaged, it reinforces certain aspects, ignores others. It makes you wonder, who are we when the algorithm isn't watching? How much of that backstage self is left?
Which really pushes us into some deep philosophical territory, isn't it? Like, is there even a single fixed true self to align with?
Exactly. Some thinkers challenge that whole idea. David Hume saw the self as just a bundle of perceptions constantly shifting.
And Foucault saw identity as shaped by power structures defining what's normal or deviant.
Right. And Judith Butler's work on gender being performed, not inherent. It all suggests maybe the goal isn't finding this static, authentic me and making the world see it perfectly.
So what then, if it's not about perfect matching?
Maybe alignment is more about becoming aware of the performance, the fluidity, the negotiation, understanding that identity isn't a fixed statue, it's more like Lurk River,
Yeah.
constantly flowing, changing shape, interacting with its environment.
Okay, I like that metaphor. The river. So if we accept this complexity, this flow, this potential for misalignment, how do we actually deal with it? Practically, how do we feel less stressed by the gap?
The sources offer a few ideas, tools maybe. One is just simple reflection, pausing to ask yourself, where in my life do I feel like I'm mostly performing? And where do I feel like I'm really just being?
It's powerful, just noticing.
Yeah, and seeking feedback, but from trusted sources, people who see you with nuance and care, not just through stereotypes.
People who offer a thoughtful mirror, not a funhouse one.
Exactly. Also, things like media literacy, consciously taking in stories that challenge your default categories for people. And sometimes what one source called subversive expression,
Like what?
like reclaiming a stereotype with irony or using art or humor to push back against the box people try to put you in.
Even small things, right? Micro-connections, a genuine question instead of an assumption.
Totally. Those brief moments can chip away at surface judgments. Ultimately, maybe the aim isn't perfect alignment, which might be impossible anyway. Maybe it's more about honest negotiation.
Identity is a dialogue.
Yeah, a dialogue between your inner sense of self and the world. Each interaction is a chance to offer a piece of your truth, maybe make peace with not being fully understood all the time, and crucially, stay curious about the parts of others that aren't immediately obvious.
That connects to some really core questions that came up in the material. Like, do we owe it to other people to be authentic, whatever that means?
That's a big one. The consensus seems to be maybe not 100% authentic to everyone all the time. Strategic self-presentation can be necessary, even wise, for safety, for getting things done.
But maybe we owe it to ourselves.
That seems closer to it. The real question is, am I performing or hiding in a way that causes me harm, that disconnects me from my own values or sense of integrity? Authenticity seems really context-dependent.
And what about that fluidity? If we're the river, not the statue, society loves consistency, right?
Yeah.
Employers, platforms.
They do. Society prizes coherence. But deep authenticity might be more about integrity being true to your current truth, even as it evolves. You can own that flux. You can say, this is where I am now, or I'm exploring this.
But how do you stay grounded if you're always changing?
Maybe anchor in values, not fixed labels. Your specific political stance might shift, but you might consistently value fairness or critical thinking. Your style might change, but you always value self-expression. Values provide the riverbed, even as the water flows. Think of yourself like a complex character in a long novel, not a simple type.
Okay, what about when people just can't label you? You don't fit neatly. Politically homeless, mixed race, non-binary.
It makes people uncomfortable, often very uncomfortable. Labels are mental shortcuts. They provide a sense of order, even safety. When someone defies easy categorization, it introduces ambiguity,
Uncertainty.
which our System 1 brains hate. Exactly. That uncertainty can easily curdle into suspicion or anxiety for the other person. You see it all the time. The "what are you" question directed at mixed-race people, the mistrust of political centrists from both sides. They resist easy narrative closure.
So what's the takeaway there? Just resign yourself to making people uncomfortable.
Well, a key insight from the sources is this. You don't owe the world easy legibility at the cost of your own truth. If someone can only connect with a simplified, boxed-in version of you, is that real connection anyway? False clarity often leads to false intimacy.
But is striving for nuance practical in this fast-paced world?
Sometimes, honestly, maybe not. In big systems, nuance can be inefficient. Forms need boxes to tick. But in relationships that matter, it's essential for integrity. And you don't have to give a lecture. You can just say, it's complicated, or I see it a few different ways. Practicality and nuance aren't enemies. Use simpler signals when you need to, with strangers maybe, but don't shrink yourself down so much you disappear entirely.
This brings us right to the ethics of it all. Labeling others, perceiving others. How do we do this ethically?
Yeah, this is crucial. The sources stress that ethical missteps happen when we assume without asking, when we impose labels for our convenience, when we reduce someone's whole complex life to our first impression.
Intent versus impact.
Exactly. Intent matters, but impact is what's felt. Even seemingly harmless assumptions can make someone feel unseen, or pressured to conform to a box that just doesn't fit.
Like with neurodivergence, it's one thing to notice someone thinks differently, but another to slap a label on them or speculate publicly.
Precisely. Or using an assumption like, oh, they must be autistic, to dismiss their perspective. The ethical path, the sources suggest, is curiosity and respect. Instead of assuming, maybe ask, how do you prefer to communicate about this? Or what support would be helpful here? And if someone does choose to self-identify, respect their framing, even if it doesn't match your preconceptions.
What about complex cultural or ethnic identities? That example of the black child raised in Japan by German parents. How do you ethically label that?
The point there was that you probably can't and shouldn't find one single label. Trying to force one ignores their actual life. They might be legally Japanese, culturally German, racially black. None of those alone tells the story. Our labeling systems just aren't built for that kind of multifaceted reality, which is becoming more common.
It feels like our language hasn't caught up. We lack the simple words for this complexity.
That's a huge point from the sources. Language lags reality. Many of our categories were built for administration, not for human depth. We genuinely need new ways to talk about identity that honor hybridity, change, internal experience.
Which raises that fundamental question. Who gets to own a label? Who decides?
Historically, power. Dominant groups labeled others to control and often diminish them. The shift now, the sources argue, is towards reclaiming that power, the right to self-identify. So the ethical question for us becomes, when I use a label, am I trying to genuinely understand this person better, or just trying to organize them into a category that makes me feel comfortable? Am I making room for their reality or forcing them into my pre-existing box? Observing patterns is human, but reducing, imposing, or overriding someone's truth isn't ethical.
It feels like, with all this complexity, maybe expecting immediate alignment, being on the same page instantly, is unrealistic.
Probably, yeah. And maybe that initial misalignment isn't a failure. Maybe it's an opening, an invitation.
An invitation to what?
To a deeper conversation. The sources connect this back to the pace of life. We're so driven by efficiency, deadlines, metrics. Those things reward quick reads, simple categories, not the slow, sometimes messy work of actually seeing another person.
We're too rushed to ask why, so we default to the labels to keep things moving.
Right. But the paradox is we strive for productivity, but we end up missing the people. And later on, what do you remember? Not the emails you cleared. You remember the moments of real connection.
Yeah, you remember feeling seen or seeing someone else.
Exactly. Accomplishments are events, but stories create meaning. And meaning is relational. The ethics of what we do isn't just the outcome, it's how we treated people along the way. It's about kindness, allowing complexity, feeling seen without being punished for it.
So misalignment can be a doorway, not a wall, if we choose to see it that way.
It can be. Instead of tensing up when someone doesn't fit your expectation, you could try curiosity. Huh, that's interesting. Tell me more. I see we view this differently, and that's okay. I want to understand your perspective. Real connection often grows from navigating that initial gap with genuine curiosity.
Okay, so the framework seems to be, people are complex, misalignment is normal, our brains simplify, but that has costs, and curiosity is more ethical than labeling.
And maybe trying to slow down enough, even for a moment, to actually be with someone, instead of thinking, why are they like that? Maybe wondering, what might it be like to be them right now, instead of they're difficult, maybe. Has anyone asked for their full story lately?
But that's not all straightforward, is it? The sources were careful to include counterpoints, real challenges to this.
Absolutely. It's not a simple fix. For instance, the burden of navigating nuance isn't shared equally. For marginalized folks, demanding complexity or fluidity might be a luxury they can't afford. Performing simplicity might be about survival. Fluidity can be actively punished in rigid systems if you don't have safety nets.
That's a crucial point. And also, connection isn't always the right goal, ethically. Sometimes setting boundaries, disconnecting from harmful people or ideologies is necessary. Not every gap needs bridging.
True. And there's the real issue of cognitive overload. Trying to hold everyone's full complexity all the time, it's genuinely exhausting. We do need functional shortcuts. Sometimes, simpler labels used respectfully can build trust or facilitate action. Balancing efficiency and ethics is hard.
Plus, let's be real, not everyone wants to be seen deeply. Some find introspection uncomfortable, ambiguity unsafe. Forcing depth on someone isn't respectful either.
Right. Respecting distance is also key. And finally, that idea of connection over accomplishment shouldn't devalue other paths. For some, building something, creating, achieving mastery, that is their core meaning, their way of contributing. Yeah. There's dignity in dedicated work that benefits others, even if it's not overtly relational.
So how do we hold all that The ideal and the reality.
Maybe the final reframe the sources offer is thinking of connection, of seeing complexity as an invitation, not an expectation.
An invitation. How so?
Offer your curiosity, but don't demand vulnerability in return. Hold space for ambiguity if it arises, but don't force someone to perform complexity they don't feel safe showing. See the potential for depth, but let people reveal themselves at their own pace. Make room, don't make rules. Offer your own depth, perhaps, but don't impose it on others. The insight is most powerful when it remembers those who can't safely embrace complexity, when it balances connection with boundaries, and when it gets that sometimes simplicity is just a necessary tool.
Wow. Okay. So navigating identity in this world.
Yeah.
Takes courage, self-awareness, definitely compassion.
Yeah.
For ourselves navigating it and for others. It's not about perfect alignment or making ourselves easy to read for everyone. It's messier.
Yeah.
More dynamic.
Yeah, think about that image from the sources of the crowd as cathedral. Next time you're in a crowd, just look around.
Yeah.
That person on their phone, maybe waiting for news that changes everything, the one rushing past, carrying some invisible joy or sorrow. Every single person has an inner world more intricate than you'll ever grasp from the outside.
And in that moment, you can choose just to
Yeah.
honor that unseen complexity. They don't need to be stereotyped for you.
Exactly. Our brains use shortcuts, yes. It's not about guilt, it's about awareness. Catching yourself reducing someone gives you a chance to choose again. Not aiming for perfect perception, just being awake to the possibility of more.
And turning that same lens inward, right?
Mhm.
This is also about how we see ourselves.
Absolutely. You aren't just your job title or your relationship status or your political affiliation. You're this incredible tangle of memories, contradictions, hopes, past selves. You don't owe anyone a simple, easy-to-understand package.
But maybe you owe it to yourself to live that depth
Hmm.
and maybe extend that courtesy, that dignity of complexity to others.
That feels right. So maybe next time you're just waiting in line, stuck in traffic, passing someone on the sidewalk, just ask yourself that quiet question. What if there's more to them than I'll ever know?
And just let the question hang there.
Yeah. The question is the door.
The pause is the practice.
The person is the story.
And maybe, just maybe,
Yeah.
so are you.